Novo 510, Icarus's Children, WGBH-TV, Boston.
Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and by other public television stations. Additional funding is provided by grants from Exxon Corporation and the National Science Foundation.
I feel very nervous, and excited at the same time. And there's a runway straight ahead of you, which is appealing in a strange kind of way. You just want to pedal down it and fly off it. Okay, let go. Stop. As far as I'm concerned, the fascination in flying is to lift off the ground. That moment of getting airborne is really just beautiful.
To fly like a bird has long been a human ambition. For most, it's but a dream, a gossamer thread of thought that quickly passes under the weight of reality. Yet for a few, the thought persists. Why, with a little ingenuity, should we not, like other creatures, be able to swim through the ocean of air that surrounds us? We have, of course, already conquered the air, not just with powered aircraft, but with gliders. We can even approach the bird's highly personal relationship with the air through hang gliding. But for some, even this isn't enough. Any form of glider relies on wind and gravity as its sources of power. It is destined always to return to Earth. It has no reliable means of climbing into the air on its own. There's an element of satisfaction which is missing. Frank Irving is a lecturer in aeronautics at Imperial College, London.
There's still one little area which remains to be conquered properly, and that's man-powered flight. And if you want to make a man-powered aeroplane, this is what you need. About 1,000 square feet of plastic film, 60 pounds of balsa, some pieces of spruce, bicycle components, glue, a lot of patience, and if you put it together all in the right order, you can pedal your way into the sky. Go! Let's go!
Birds seem to achieve takeoff with such ease. So for centuries, men have strapped large wings onto themselves and hoped. It's not that easy. Maybe larger flapping wings would do the trick. But it's still not that easy. A bird's wing is a complicated and delicate piece of machinery. It requires a highly compact muscle system to drive it. Millions of years of evolution lie behind the wings of moths and bats and other creatures. Professor James Fitzpatrick of the City University of New York has worked out the mechanics.
The trick the bird and the bat incidentally use is that they have a wing which folds during its beating operation. It makes an angle makes a very steep curve in here, a heavy camber during the upstroke, and flattens out during the downstroke. When the wing moves up, the air pressure automatically closes the wing up partially. When the wing moves down, the air pressure opens the wing and gives it its full surface. The outside part does most of the propelling, and the inside part most of the lifting. The wing, as it beats, literally acts like a pump. It pumps a mass of air at each stroke, and it throws this mass of air off in a swirling vortex. And you will note, as I raise and lower the wing, it starts driving me forward. If man could only achieve flapping flight, he would have solved many of his personal transportation problems. And it is to this end that I have worked for over 40 years in building this machine you will see. It is called an ornithopter, flapping wing aircraft. The wing is operated by compressed air cylinders which pull on cables. Because you're making an airplane, you want the lightest, and the lightest thing for a given force is an air cylinder. The lower ones, the pair together down there, can pull with a force of about 1,000 pounds on that cable. The upper one can pull with a force of about 500 pounds on this cable. The cylinders you could compare to the pectoral muscle of the bird. The cable is like a tendon, actually. These wings can beat with a sufficient air supply at 90 strokes per minute, and at that point, it is calculated, using the 10 horsepower, this machine would be able to achieve a takeoff.
Professor Fitzpatrick's machine demonstrates that the complexities of a flapping wing make it too heavy, and therefore out of the question for a man-powered aircraft. There is no option but to abandon flapping and go for a simpler method, a fixed wing. With a little forward motive power, it should work. Give it enough power, make your plane strong enough, not too heavy, and you should take off. The principles are deceptively simple. The weight of the man and his machine is propelled forward by the power in his body transmitted to the air around him. This acts on an airfoil and provides lift. But the whole assembly is affected by drag in a variety of ways. The equation has to balance. To increase the power probably means a heavier pilot. More power may increase the lift, but it also increases the drag, which has to be overcome by more power, and so on. Everything is related. The first people to make the equation balance were Helmut Hessler and Frank Willinger in Germany in the 1930s. Their plane was catapulted into the air by large rubber bands. Once airborne, it maintained horizontal flight under its own power for several hundred yards. At about the same time in Italy, the Petagliante was built by Ennio Bossi. The pedals on this aircraft drove two contra-rotating propellers, but it had to be towed into the air. It definitely flew, but there was considerable argument as to whether it had ever achieved a man-powered takeoff. 20 years later in London, the Royal Aeronautical Society persuaded a reluctant businessman, Henry Kramer, to put up a special prize for the first genuine man-powered flight. The Kramer course was designed to eliminate any kind of cheating. Takeoff must be unassisted. When the machine reaches a height of 10 feet, the course begins. The pilot must fly a figure-8 circuit around 2 markers half a mile apart. This means he cannot take advantage of any downhill slope or helpful wind. It's all human-powered. Finally, he must reach a height of 10 feet again at the end of the course. The prize of £5,000, then about $14,000, offered in 1959, inspired a burst of activity, initially in England. Students at Southampton University were the first to have their plane ready for takeoff. Built like a glider, with a prop sticking out of the top, it was named Sumpak. November 1961, the pilot Derek Piggott presented the plane to the media. He was chosen because of his experience as a glider pilot. He remembers that first day well.
The first time the airplane was ever off the ground, the first indication we had was the pedal slipping. And I knew I'd been off the ground, but no one else could detect it. They couldn't see daylight between the wheels.
At the moment of takeoff, the craft suddenly veered alarmingly. But it wasn't damaged, and they tried again.
The first real flying we did, we went about 50 or 75 yards, I suppose. And it was a tremendous thrill.
This was the first real man-powered takeoff and landing. But there were more flights to come. The wings were made of spruce glued with epoxy and covered in doped nylon fabric. The fuselage was made of aluminum and was bolted to the wings. The ground wheel and the propeller were linked by a belt drive. But Sumpak was proving difficult to control and quickly exhausted the pilot. A later version incorporated 1 or 2 modifications, and the pilot appeared wearing pajamas to save weight. It was once again Derek Piggott.
When we started flying, we always had very light winds from the west, and so we were going down the slope of the runway. It turned out the slope was very significant. It was about 1 in 100, and this means that going down the hill, it's very much easier to get off the ground.
The new plane was better, but still not right for the Kramer course.
I thought when we first flew the airplane that even if our own airplane wasn't good enough to do the flying because of control problems, that the one from Hatfield probably was.
The Hatfield machine was called Puffin and was being built at the same time as Sumpak by a group from the de Havilland Aircraft Company. Thin sheets of balsa wood covered most of the wing and fuselage. The pedals turned a balsa wood tube connected to a propeller, which was at the back to avoid turbulence over the wings. If Sumpak was built like a glider, Puffin, although a little bulbous in places, looked more like a regular plane. The pilot was John Wimpenny, an aerodynamicist. He missed being the first man to achieve man-powered takeoff by only 7 days. On the 16th of November, 1961, Puffin flew. The balsa wood skin creaked and groaned as it stretched. Although slightly heavier than Sumpak, this machine made no less than 90 flights in 2 years. Before one misty morning, it came to an abrupt end. The opportunity was taken to redesign and rebuild the plane, with many more spars in a much stronger wing. With several modifications, this made Puffin II heavier still. Although the improved airfoil produced more lift, this was canceled out by the extra weight. It flew easily and frequently, but it was not as successful as his predecessor. It was still difficult to control, and finally crashed into a pylon. But the memory of Puffin I carried with it a distance record of 993 yards, which was to stand for 10 years. It was to be beaten by this man.
Of course, pedaling the man-powered aircraft is physically very demanding. The pilot needs to be able to develop a steady 0.4 horsepower with occasional bursts up to 0.6 or 0.8.
In 1972, a young flight lieutenant named John Potter turned his attention to the power side of the equation.
Each day I travel about 5 miles to work over a measured course. When I started, I thought 20 minutes would be a good time to brake. But now we're down to 13.5 seconds.
He works at a Royal Air Force training college, and it was an RAF group that took over a machine called Jupiter, which had not yet flown. Potter's muscle power made it fly. He was also a trained and skillful pilot, although this sort of flying was a bit new to him.
Fortunately, there was very little damage. All we did was to buckle the wheel and tear a few of the cockpit stringers out, and the cost of this was a couple of weeks' work and about £1.50 for a new wheel and a tin of glue.
Jupiter was a cross between Sumpac and Puffin. Built from conventional material, it was the heaviest yet. But it had one major advantage. Aerodynamically, it was the cleanest configuration so far. The drag was very low. This, with Potter's stamina, made it a surprisingly successful machine. On its 60th flight in May 1972, it flew for over 3/4 of a mile, which beat Puffin's 10-year-old distance record. It would have gone on, but as it wasn't very good at turning, it eventually ran out of runway. Potter went on to work with computers, and he took his interest in the Kramer course with him.
That looks quite good.
This was the first time that it had been analyzed on a computer.
The aim of the program is to imitate the aircraft behavior in flight by describing to the computer in terms of 100 numbers exactly what the aircraft is like. Its wingspan, its weight, fin area, whether it's a nose wheel or tail wheel aircraft. And then we go on to describe its behavior in fairly complicated mathematical equations. Well, of course, we tended to be very suspicious of these results until they could be corroborated on a real aircraft. And we had the flight tests of Jupiter, so we fed the machine with the 100 numbers which describe Jupiter exactly, and much to our surprise, the machine gave agreement in general aspects, in power requirement and general behavior. Certain important details showed up as well, such as the tendency of the aircraft nose to rise slightly after takeoff, or the 2 or 3 degrees of adverse yaw which I saw when I applied ailerons. And these findings then strengthened our confidence that this was a good model of man-powered aircraft, and one which we could apply not only to Jupiter, but to other similar designs.
There was another design available. Completed in 1970 by the British Aircraft Corporation group at Weybridge, it was called Dumbo because of its enormous wings. They were attacking the lift side of the equation by having the biggest possible airfoil. Dumbo was rather frail, but it looked good on Potter's computer. So the RAF group took over Dumbo, rebuilt it with modifications, and called it Mercury.
A few feet more. Slowing down now. Stop there. Let's have the canopy off then.
His Air Force training and the availability of highly organized manpower in both Jupiter and Mercury projects were of enormous help to John Potter.
We've contact at the back. That's fine. Fine, all secure then. That's nice. Controls are full and free. Check tail up, tail down, rudder left, and rudder right. Check prop turning.
But Dumbo was a big disappointment. She was hardly living up to her new name, Mercury. For one thing, she was much heavier than they anticipated. For another, there was a basic design fault.
Although the propeller was turning when it became detached, it came off backwards. Now, one would normally expect a propeller to be thrusting forward, but in this case, it was obviously retarding the aircraft, creating more drag than thrust. This is a situation which is not uncommon in man-powered propeller design. And in fact, we haven't been very happy with this propeller for some time. And in consequence, we have, in the last few days, produced a new propeller, a much wider chord design, rather like the Jupiter machine. And we should find this performs much better.
That was in 1974. Since then, the RAF has found what are felt to be more important projects for the intrepid officer. If one person can provide power to lift an aircraft off the ground, then certainly two can. A plane based on this idea and called Toucan had been built by another group. There's nothing against it in the Kramer rules, but the increase in power was accompanied, of course, by an increase in weight, which required an increase in lift, which meant the wingspan had to be even larger than Dumbo. The trouble with a long wingspan is that it cannot always carry its own weight. But by then it was being recognized that the Kramer prize was perhaps attainable. It had been increased to 50,000 pounds, about $100,000, and was open to all comers. In France, Maurice Jurel, a famous wartime aircraft designer, had built the Aviette. He too had chosen a very long wingspan, the longest yet, but also narrow to reduce the weight and drag. Significantly, it was partially supported by wires from a central king post. This meant the wing structure could be light.
I was waiting only for good weather, but now it seems not very good. Perhaps next week, perhaps after. It's impossible to know.
The weather had been unkind to Monsieur Jurel, but nevertheless, the Aviette flew for 3/4 of a mile in 1974, almost beating Jupiter's distance record. At the same time, enthusiasts in Japan also had their eye on the prize. This is the Stork, built by engineering students at Nihon University, almost exactly along the lines of the successful Jupiter. The university has a tradition of man-powered flight dating from the 1960s, when several versions of their Linnet had flown, although briefly. By 1976, the Stork was flying well. Much of its success was due to very careful construction, with special attention to weight reduction. As with all man-powered planes, control of such a large structure at such slow speeds is a problem. On an English airfield, a local airport fire department lends assistance to a young architect, Tony Paxton.
Okay?
Okay, yeah, fine. Okay, Tony.
So, can you stick my feet in there? Smashing. Can you do them up?
He has built himself a much smaller and lighter machine with a relatively short wingspan.
Ooh. It's rather like being perched on top of a one-wheel pogo stick, you know? 6 foot in the air, flat on your back. Anything more absurd you can't imagine. In my legs, have got the power to get 200 pounds off the ground. That means producing just over 1/3 of a horsepower. Now that's the kind of level of energy output that an ordinary fit man can do. There's no problem, you just have to keep on taking nutriment.
A significant innovation was in the controls. The rudder and elevators were conventional.
Elevators, up and down.
But there were no ailerons to bank the wings.
Okay.
Instead, the left and right movement of the joystick twisted the entire wing on each side.
It all seems to work. Okay, let's go. See what happens. See if it rolls anyway. Hello? You like the sound of that, Brian? Yeah?
Looks like your shaft's broken, Tony. What? Your drive shaft's broken.
You reckon?
Yep.
Oh, that marvellous. Well, that's just it. Again. That's about the third time, isn't it?
Yeah. So we're going to do, take the propeller off
Yeah?
and see what we can do.
Should we give it a tow?
Yeah, why not?
It's a good day.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah. It's a pity about that thing, you know? Yeah.
All right, Tom?
Yeah, fine. Don't worry. Hang on, undo me belt.
Okay, okay.
It's very tight. Don't pull.
Okay. All right. Just leave him as he is. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Jesus, what a sight. That's come apart.
Meanwhile, in Orange County, New Jersey, a real individualist was at work.
I turned back to the great masters, Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci, Conte, Michelangelo, and Archimedes, and all the great masters.
His name is Paul Osarchi, and his aim is to get even more power into the propulsion system by an entirely novel method. The cables run to the back of the aircraft, where they're attached to a giant lever. His quest has involved considerable sacrifice, both for him and his family.
My funding was very limited, and then after I exhausted all our savings, I went ahead and I borrowed money to continue this challenge. I am taking vitamin pills. I'm taking vitamin A and vitamin E. And my wife is making sure I take my vitamin C and other vitamins that I need to supplement some of the energy that I have to have. I designed the aircraft for my age bracket of 51 to be able to succeed in achieving this physical endurance. I would continue on, overcoming the obstacles, because that's man's innate ability is to go ahead and achieve the impossible. The impossible is what I'm after to achieve.
You can let go.
Let's go.
Okay, Terry.
On the other side of the continent, in the mountains of California, a new sport had taken hold. This is a hang glider, but it's not an ordinary hang glider. Called the Icarus V, it was designed by its pilot, Taras Kachenik.
On the Icarus V, one of the most critical points of the design is the airfoil section. It's one of a new design of airfoil sections that have been analyzed with a computer to determine the pressure distribution. With these sections, you're able to get much higher lifts than you would be able to with conventional airfoil section.
All right. Okay. Beautiful. Oh, look at that. Jesus. Incredible.
A hang glider is a small, very controllable device, with the pilot swinging the weight of his body to steer. But it needs high speeds to provide lift. It uses gravity for this, and although it can use thermal updrafts, it usually ends up lower down the hill from where it started. The computer-designed airfoil on the Icarus V provided high lift without the need for high speed. The controllability characteristics remained, and Taras Kachenik frequently found he could fly his craft home to the observatory on Mount Palomar where his father worked. This gave him the idea for a new way of attacking the Kramer Prize.
This is one of the sections I've carved out of polystyrene foam to make up the man-powered wing. There'll be 50 of these sections glued next to each other to make up the 40-foot wingspan of the man-powered airplane. 40 feet would be considered very, very, very small for a man-powered aircraft, actually ridiculous. Most of the designs have 2 or 3 times that. But I'm getting around the need for a long wingspan by flying very, very low, like less than 10 inches off the ground. When you travel this close to the ground, the air doesn't have a chance to escape away from the wing as the wing pushes down on it. This way here, the air is just compressed as the airplane passes by and then springs back, but you don't get the vortex system that's usually associated with an airplane flying through free air. All the pilot's power doesn't go into stirring up this massive wake system behind the aircraft. It just goes into simply holding him up.
This is known as ground effect. And although it was thought it might help an aircraft taking off, nobody had thought of building a plane that depended on it for the whole flight.
This is the fuselage structure. For the wheels and the seat, it weighed 9 pounds. The pilot pedals here. The power will be transmitted with a chain back to here through an idler shaft, and then rotate the propeller housing, and the propeller will be over here. The wing section bolts on down low here. Right down here, right next to the ground like this, and I'm going to turn flat. Since the turns required are actually so shallow and so gentle that I'm just going to, rather than try to bank the airplane, just yaw it slightly using the fuselage structure as much like a keel on a boat. Just skid around the corner.
But what about reaching a height of 10 feet?
I plan just to gain enough speed near the ground that when I get near to the place where the 10 feet is required, that I can zoom up to 10 feet, come back down again to the low flying regime.
By 1976, the machine was ready. It certainly looked very different from any other plane. The question was, would the ground effect, which worked in theory on a computer, actually lift the plane off the ground in practice? So far, so good, at least for short flights. What about the 10-foot requirement? To test the flying characteristics at that height, they gave it a tow. In sharp contrast to powered aircraft, man-powered machines seemed a dismal failure. Maybe it was impossible. Maybe the equation could not be made to balance. By late in 1976, in great secrecy, another more radical approach was being tried. This time, the designer was Californian Paul McCready, a scientist and businessman who was 3 times national gliding champion.
And it'll fit in the hangar here without too much trouble.
Like Kachenik, he got the idea from hang gliding. Hang gliders, he knew, need about 1.5 horsepower to keep aloft, 3 times a man's capacity. But he could cut the power needed by flying very slowly and cutting drag. To maintain lift at the low speed, he would need a wing 3 times larger than a hang glider, but still the same weight. Weight reduction became McCrady's prime objective. The computer-designed airfoil was a single sheet of very thin but very strong mylar. Adhesive tape was all that was needed to stick it together. This had the advantage that modifications and repairs after accidents could be made quickly and cheaply.
Okay.
The framework was the thinnest aluminum tubing possible, braced with steel piano wire, also quick and cheap to repair and modify. This was an advantage that was to prove crucial. Another important feature was that there was little or no strength in the wing itself. The central aluminum king post took the strain. On the ground, the wing would hang from the wires attached to the top of the pole. In the air, the weight of the pilot would hang from the wires attached to the bottom of the pole from the underside of the wing. The absence of load-bearing spars in the wings saved a huge amount of weight. It was quite unlike any other craft. The overall weight, a mere 70 pounds, less than 1/2 that of Jupiter. The power supply, in the form of McCrady's young son Tyler, was attached to the plane in December 1976 for the first test flight.
Pour attention on it all when you can. Down a little, up a little, down a little. You're flying all this time. Okay, let's leave it at that. Too much wind.
From the very first, it needed almost no takeoff run. It floated into the air.
Okay, I'm not pulling it all now. You're doing all the work. Try go a little faster, 7.5 or so.
Ooh, we go fast, we go up.
They called their craft the Gossamer Condor.
Can you read the airspeed? Okay, sock it to it. Left. Nope, straight, I guess.
It's just going down.
Down nose, down nose, down nose. Hold down, okay. When it gets close, the prop gets awfully close. Not so high. Full right. You're flying.
The Condor was essentially a developed hang glider with a prop on the back. The low-weight strategy was successful. At low speed, drag was minimized and lift was adequate.
Full left! Full!
On this plane, a crash was hardly a crash at all. But clearly, a little increase in power would help.
Tyler, yep, that's my son. Jeff, Rockwell, Greg, Miller, what?
Yeah, Miller.
Miller, okay.
Yeah, so you've flown that thing, huh?
Yeah.
It's hard to steer?
Just try and keep it going in a straight line.
Greg Miller was a champion racing cyclist who could produce the required power at little extra weight. But unlike the young Tyler McCrady, he had no experience in flying.
You're up too much, a little.
Nonetheless, he learned and joined the team as the main pilot.
Grab it, Kurt.
All right.
Down.
I heard anything?
No. I heard something snap up there in the wing.
In the winter months of 1977, test flying continued, often late at night or before dawn, when the air was at its stillest. Innumerable modifications and different versions of the plane were made.
Some of the airfoil is like that.
The plastic airfoil especially gave trouble, as it was stretching and distorting in different places, reducing efficiency. Components that broke had to be made stronger, and that meant heavier. Depression began to set in on the design team and the pilots. But slowly their efforts were rewarded with long, steady flights by Greg Miller. If he kept to the right speed, he found he could go on and on.
It'll cheer him up. He was wondering where all his muscle was today.
It was the slowest flying plane in the world, between 7 and 10 miles per hour. But it flew and flew.
6717.
Yeah, wonder how long that was.
5 acres.
Just about 3 minutes.
I think we better send a car expedition.
So confident were they that in January 1977, they went for their first ever attempt on the Kramer Prize.
I don't know that he wants.
Those are the rules. And yeah, I've got some.
Those who were in the know came out to watch.
But you probably won't try the major thing today, just a
try
straight
it.
fly. Oh, you are going to?
We're going to try it. We're going to lay out the course, take the vehicle out, try the thing. But there's been nowhere near enough flight practice with the vehicle and with the guy to give us a good chance.
Only up to here and there.
The plane was ready. The course was laid out. The judges came from the local Air Force base. They'd been designated by the Royal Aeronautical Society in London. Shortly after dawn, January 14, 1977, Greg Miller was ready in the hot seat.
Yeah.
Ropes.
Or should I go 10 and then come down?
Yeah. He'll probably put it up.
Okay.
Watch it and try and keep the wings level because there's too much wind. Leading it. Yeah, that's okay. It got up too big an angle.
Too big of an angle?
After you got up in the air, and that slowed it down and stalled it.
Should I get out or?
No, I think I can just drag it back.
But the wind was already too strong, and the attempt had to be abandoned, at least for that day. There followed several more attempts, accompanied by constant computer analysis. They were working on the margins of flight, and with the slightest breath of wind, the Gossamer Condor became uncontrollable.
Much too steep. That's a stall. Keep holding him. Oh, gee. Keep the prop from hurting. Oh, pull it. Grab it, grab it, grab it.
Obviously, something had to be done about the lack of control at such slow speed. Paul McCready listened to all the suggestions for modifications that his design team made. Except when it was flying straight and level in zero wind conditions, the Gossamer Condor behaved more like a feather than an airplane. Just banking the huge wings was difficult because of the resistance of the great mass of air that had to be displaced, an effect known as apparent mass.
I was thinking about it for the last 3 weeks or so as we were worrying about the control configurations, but wasn't aware of it as a huge problem until the tests that were done last Friday. So Friday night really began trying to work on it, estimate its magnitude, and then yesterday, worked it all out and decided on this new configuration. This is a model that we did a few little flight tests with, same stabilizer, but stuck down lower so it's in ground effect a little more, and its wake inhibits or hurts the wing less, also doesn't hurt the prop efficiency. As to the wing, we've decreased the chord at the root from about that large to what you see, but at the tip, it's smaller still, so it has less total area. You fly a little faster, but the small chord at the tip in particular cuts down the apparent mass effect and the roll damping, so it makes it much more responsive to controls. Just the small ailerons actually roll this vehicle properly, whereas huge ailerons it would not have much effect at all on the present vehicle due to these inertia effects primarily. The apparent mass effect on an ordinary airplane, even on an ordinary man-powered airplane flying at 16 or 20 miles an hour, is pretty much negligible because it's smaller than the inertia of the wing, or the roll inertia. In our case, the apparent mass is much larger because we've gone to such a large wing. Nobody's ever tried to fly a plane that only flies at 8 miles an hour before, or even 6 miles an hour. When you do, you have to get into this problem, though nobody had ever confronted it before, there, as far as I know.
First came a change of location. The bundles of tubes and the plastic sheeting were loaded into a truck and taken to a new airfield at Shafter, near Bakersfield in the Central Valley. Not only was there more hangar space, but the weather here was better. The cold air from the mountains did not roll down across the airfield when the sun rose each morning. Early mornings had become routine for the ground crew and pilots, but one such morning saw a brand new plane on the runway. The thinner main wing was now swept back instead of being straight, and the small foreplane, known as a canard wing, was much closer to the ground. The wingtip ailerons had not made their appearance after all. As the plane was to fly a little faster, the pilot and all the drive mechanisms around him had to be enclosed in plastic to reduce the extra drag generated. Every alteration affects everything else. But did McCready get it right? He had already spent several thousands of dollars, and the Kramer Prize was beginning to look not so large. He was working at the frontiers of knowledge, and that can be a lonely place. He is a quiet man, and his friends sometimes found it difficult to know what he was thinking. The airfoil was now smoother, with a more effective double skin. This also meant that only a single aluminum spar was needed between the two layers, cutting down on weight. It took a few tries to master the new machine, but it quickly became clear that it was much more stable, and it was beginning to make turns. The canard at the front was much lower, so that its airflow did not affect the wing. As the pilot tilted it, it pulled the plane slowly round after it. Before long, the new version of the Gossamer Condor had flown further and longer than all the other man-powered machines put together. It had made one flight of over 5 minutes, and it had managed a couple of 180-degree turns. It was time for another attempt on the Kramer Prize. This time, takeoff is perfect.
That's good. Point it down. Point it down. It gets easier. Turn left.
Urged on by the designer, the Gossamer Condor, with Greg Miller at the controls, climbs towards the first obstacle on the course, the 10-foot-high pole. "3 feet to spare.
Stop pedaling! Stop pedaling! Full left!
Oh, shit! Oh!
Gee.
God damn it! Oh, shit!
No, that wasn't your fault. You did everything right. The control wasn't enough. Try and hold it up a little. Hold it up. Lloyd, you try and get him out to get the weight on. Oh, yeah.
Nothing you can do about it, don't we?
Somebody got the dolly. That's okay, we fixed them in 6 hours. There's a defect which we should have seen because every time and the end of the flight on the previous day, the right wing was going down a bit. There wasn't enough left control. And that was the case here.
It just wouldn't go left. I had a full
Yeah, I know. It had a full left. And it wouldn't.
God.
So, let's see. Can you hold this wing? This wing's perfectly okay, but I got to get the other wing.
What a day.
But it was not a total disaster. For one thing, the plane could quickly be rebuilt. For another, they realized that there was a slight twist in one of the wings, which had been pulling the aircraft to the right. the canard had been unable to overcome the pull. Even larger control forces were needed.
The course in 6 minutes.
I know it.
6 minutes. That's only 1 minute more than you flew. Yeah, and with less power.
We zapped out there, when we took off the air, that was just super easy.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, see you guys later.
Yep.
Give me a call, Paul.
Will do.
You need me.
Yeah, thanks.
Where are the nails, Bill?
There are some on the table, left-hand side.
Unfortunately, Greg had to leave for Belgium to continue his professional cycling career. So the project lost the pilot that had done most of the development flying. By a stroke of luck, a new one was found in 24-year-old Brian Allen. He, too, was a racing cyclist, but he was also very experienced at hang gliding. He lived close to the airport and was unemployed at the time, and he weighed only 135 pounds. He took to the Condor like a duck to water, and was soon pedaling it all over the airfield. The strange craft became a common sight to the people of Shafter. However, although it was stable and controllable in level flight, the big turns were still a problem.
Well, he was giving hard over on the yoke. Oh, absolutely, but the foreplane was not moving very much.
Just doesn't seem to provide that sideways force. I think maybe we should...
No, but even if it had no sideways force before, we didn't get in a condition where the plane would be going sideways with plane would be going along with one tip down.
Left turn!
They decided that what had always been happening, even when Greg was flying, was that as the plane banked in a turn, the inside wing was traveling much more slowly and was losing lift. The plane needed more horsepower to keep it in the air at that angle, and that is just what's not available in a man-powered aircraft. Then suddenly, a new idea began to emerge.
But, you see, less important than that to me is twist of the wing. It seems to me that with a swept wing, you have so much more control of the angle of incidence than you think you do by means of twist. Wash in and wash out. That those two wires which are now on there with which you can just stand and twist the wing several degrees look like the clue to me.
That's possible.
And one of the things that John and I were talking about in there is the possibility of trying to rig the control wires in such a way that you deliberately take advantage of that effect.
Yes.
And that may still be a possibility.
After computer analysis, they fitted a small lever under the seat, which by pulling on the wires put a fixed amount of twist in the wing. It worked. Pull the lever either way, and you have a perfect banking turn. The twist increases the angle of attack of the inside wing. This produces extra drag, which pulls it back and turns the whole aircraft. But it also produces the extra lift required to compensate for the slower speed. The Condor had never looked happier. A cable had come off a pulley, but Brian Allen was neither hurt nor dismayed.
It's remarkably easy, just the actual control inputs that you have to give to it. I think it's probably just about the easiest machine to fly ever made.
So another try at the Kramer Prize seemed worthwhile. This was the 9th, and the judges were getting a little irritated at being called out.
500 between 11 and 8.
Come on, Brian!
All went well with both turns, but there suddenly seemed some doubt as to whether he would make the last 10-foot marker.
I couldn't see the pole, man.
I know.
And everybody was yelling up 1, 2, 3, 4.
Come on.
And I didn't know where it was, man.
I know.
Did I make it?
Bill, did he make it?
Not quite.
No, not quite. No. Come on, let's get out.
But on the 23rd of August, 1977, their 10th attempt came. Some small last-minute modification by Paul McCready, and Brian was off.
Well, we could see a shadow where it was. A couple times.
6 minutes later, he had completed both turns, and he was in the home stretch.
Come on, Brian! Come on, Brian! Come on! Pump it up there! Come on!
Ahead of him, only the last 10-foot barrier.
By 2 feet!
3 months later, the project members climbed aboard a plane that was to fly them in a conventional manner to London. They came to a building just off Piccadilly at Hyde Park Corner. On the evening of November the 30th, 1977, they were to be presented with the £50,000 Kramer Prize by Prince Charles. But first, here at the Royal Aeronautical Society's headquarters, where it all began, they met other man-powered aircraft designers and enthusiasts.
He finally did it by landing completely straight down, just went plumb, helping to solve some of the problems of turns.
Is the Reynolds number of your wires so low that they're operating at a fairly low drag coefficient?
The drag coefficient's 1.2.
Maybe that's part of what makes your section.
The success of the Gossamer Condor means the end of a chapter. But the story of man-powered flight is just beginning. There will be new goals to be attained. And the designers and pilots who first struggled into the air will not be forgotten.
For a transcript, send $2 to this address. Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and by other public television stations. Additional funding is provided by grants from Exxon Corporation and the National Science Foundation.